When the first Republic P-47 Thunderbolts appeared over occupied Europe in early 1943, Luftwaffe pilots squinted up from their cockpits with a mixture of curiosity and scorn. The new American fighter looked nothing like the slender Messerschmitt B F-109S or the muscular Focke-Wulf 190S they flew. Its fuselage was huge, its nose dominated by an outsized propeller, its wings thick and broad. On the ground, German crews derisively called it a flying milk churn or a bathtub with wings. Around briefing tables, they joked that any pilot who tried a dogfight in such a monster would end up as a smoking crater. But appearances were deceiving. Inside that bulky airframe beat one of the most powerful piston engines yet fitted to a fighter. The 18-cylinder Pratt & Whitney R2 800 Double Wasp, driving a 4-bladed propeller taller than a man. With a turbo supercharger tucked deep in its belly, the engine could hurl the Thunderbolt to speeds that surprised even seasoned test pilots. At altitude, the big fighter's performance came alive, climbing with heavy bombers and still able to dive like a stone. Its cockpit was large and well armored, and its fuel tanks were self-sealing. American designers had built a machine whose size hid a unique combination of power, ruggedness, and reach. The first combats over northern France and the Low Countries were a rude awakening for both sides. German aces dived on the new arrivals, expecting easy kills, only to find their cannon shells punching ragged holes in wings and fuselage without bringing the target down. Many P-47s came home with shredded tailplanes or cylinders shot out of the engine, yet still flying straight. Allied mechanics patched them up, bolted on replacement parts, and sent them back up the next morning. Stories of Thunderbolts limping back across the channel with half a rudder or one gear down became legendary in fighter groups and a source of irritation to Luftwaffe intelligence officers who had predicted a short service life for the fat Americans. Gradually, the role of the P-47 expanded. Initially designed as a high-altitude escort, it became far more than a flying bodyguard for B-17s. With 8.50 caliber Browning machine guns bristling from its wings, it could shred a formation of bombers or strafe a railway yard into twisted steel. Republic engineers had left ample room under the wings for bombs and rockets, and pilots soon discovered how well the Thunderbolt could dive onto ground targets, pull out, and climb back to safety. Luftwaffe airfields, truck convoys, troop columns, and bridges became favorite prey. On the ground, German soldiers learned to dread the sudden roar of radial engines, followed by the hammering of heavy machine guns. Villages near rail junctions or depots were littered with burned-out locomotives and shattered wagons, testament to the Allied juggernaut. The nickname GIs had affectionately shortened to Jug for their own aircraft. Supply officers complained that every time the front needed fuel or ammunition, another train had been destroyed by those same fat-winged fighters the Luftwaffe had mocked months before. What impressed the German pilots most, however, was the Thunderbolt's behavior in a dive. The massive airframe gave it inertia and speed that few opponents could match. In a steep plunge, the P-47 could exceed 500 miles per hour, and its rugged wings and control surfaces allowed it to pull out where lighter fighters risked disintegration. Time after time, Messerschmitts followed the Jug down, only to find it leveling out below them, rolling inverted, and climbing back up with enough energy to attack. The clumsy American was turning out to be a deadly opponent in vertical maneuvers. By the summer of 1944, over Normandy and the Ardennes, the laughter had gone. Thunderbolts prowled the skies in ever greater numbers, escorting bombers, sweeping ahead of invasion forces, then swooping low to smash tanks and trucks. Luftwaffe pilots, flying dwindling numbers of increasingly fuel-starved machines, found themselves hunted from above and harassed from below. Each new mission felt less like a joust between knights of the air, and more like trying to hold back an avalanche. By the winter of 1944 to 45, the European sky had become a very different battlefield. What had once been a domain of proud Luftwaffe aces had turned into a hazardous gauntlet patrolled by wave after wave of Allied fighters. Among them, the P-47 Thunderbolt stood out not for its elegance, but for its ubiquity and its devastating effect. The machine that German pilots had once dismissed as a flying bathtub now haunted their missions, an omnipresent predator above their heads and a scourge on the roads, railways, and bridges below. In the last months of the war, every operational report from the front included some mention of the Jug. Supply officers begged for more camouflage nets and anti-aircraft guns. Field commanders rearranged their timetables to move at night. Yet still the heavy roar of radial engines would come at dawn, and with it the hammering of .50 caliber fire and the shriek of rockets. Armored columns stalled, ammunition dumps exploded, and locomotives lay derailed and burning. For the Luftwaffe, already strangled by fuel shortages and the loss of experienced pilots, the Thunderbolt was not simply another enemy fighter. It was a relentless system of destruction, eroding their capacity to fight at all. American pilots, for their part, had grown into their machine. They learned to exploit its strengths: high-speed dives, rugged survivability, and heavy ordnance. They painted ferocious nose art and developed tactics that turned the Jug into a mobile artillery piece of the sky. They knew it could take hits that would destroy a lighter plane and still bring them back. Many who survived owed their lives to that slab of armor behind their seat, or to the giant engine that kept turning even after losing several cylinders to flak. By the time Allied armies crossed the Rhine, the psychological war was as important as the physical one. German troops dived for cover at the mere sound of radial engines. Civilians whispered that no train was safe by daylight. Even seasoned Luftwaffe pilots, if they were honest, admitted that the fat duck had become a hunter they could rarely outfly or outfight. The laughter of 1943 had turned into grudging respect, and finally into silence. Historians later counted the results. More than 500,000 sorties flown by Thunderbolts in the European theater, tens of thousands of vehicles and locomotives destroyed, and thousands of enemy aircraft claimed in the air. The Jug had outgrown its original role as escort fighter to become a decisive instrument of strategic interdiction and close air support. It was not glamorous. It did not produce as many household name aces as some other fighters. But it did what had to be done day after day, grinding down the enemy's strength. And therein lies the enduring lesson of the P-47. War is not only about duels between sleek fighters or brilliant maneuvers by individual pilots. It is also about endurance, mass, and the unrelenting application of pressure. The Thunderbolt embodied that truth. Its size, once a joke, gave it the fuel and the guns to reach deep into enemy territory and hit hard. Its ruggedness, once dismissed as clumsiness, allowed pilots to take risks and survive. Combined with the industrial power of the United States and the courage of its airmen, those qualities transformed an underestimated machine into one of the most effective weapons of the Second World War. When the guns finally fell silent in Europe in May 1945, the Jug had become a legend in its own right. German pilots no longer laughed at it. Allied troops on the ground cheered it. And aviation historians would come to rank it among the most important fighters of the conflict. The fat duck had proved that resilience and power, wielded with skill and persistence, could change the balance of a war, and could turn derision into fear, and fear into defeat.